late afternoon sun painted everything golden across the Montana prairie, and Samuel Hayes stood frozen beside his weathered fence post, watching the young woman who lay bound and bloodied on the wooden planks before him. Her dress, once white, was now stained with dirt and worse things, and her blonde hair fell in tangled strands across a face marked by fear and exhaustion. But not defeat. Somehow, not defeat. "Save me, please," she whispered through cracked lips, and the words carried on the wind like a prayer. Samuel had seen terrible things in his 62 years on this earth, had witnessed cruelty that would break a younger man's spirit. But something about this moment, this plea from a stranger, made his weathered hands tremble as he gripped the knife he'd drawn from his belt. He'd found her tied to his fence like some grotesque offering left by men who'd ridden through in the night. Men whose laughter still echoed in his memory, harsh and cold as winter wind. The blade caught, the dying light as he raised it, and for a heartbeat time seemed suspended between what was and what could be. Then he stumbled backward as if struck by lightning, because in her eyes, those green eyes flecked with gold, he saw something that reminded him of his daughter Mary, who'd been gone these 15 years now, taken by fever, when she was barely more than a child herself. Samuel's knife clattered to the ground. "Lord, forgive me," he whispered, and dropped to his knees beside her, working quickly to cut the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles, his movements gentle despite the urgency that drove him. The young woman gasped as the bonds fell away and tried to sit up, but collapsed back against the fence rail, her strength spent. "Easy now," Samuel said in the same voice he'd once used to calm frightened horses. "You're safe now, child, you're safe." He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her slight shoulders, then lifted her with surprising ease for a man his age, carrying her toward the small ranch house that had been his home for more than 4 decades. The house felt different with another person in it after so many years of solitude, and Samuel found himself moving carefully through rooms that had grown used to only his footsteps. He settled her on the faded blue sofa that had been his wife Helen's favorite, and went to stoke the fire in the stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the main room. "What's your name, child?" he asked softly as flames began to dance and crackle, casting warm light across walls lined with photographs of better times. "Sarah." She managed her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Mitchell." Samuel nodded and went to the kitchen to heat water and gather clean cloths, knowing that some hurts required more than words to heal. As he worked, he found himself thinking of Helen, who'd had such gentle hands, such a gift for mending broken things. Whether they were injured animals or wounded hearts, she would have known exactly what to do, he thought. And for the first time in years, he felt her presence in the house again, as if love could somehow transcend the boundaries of life and death. When he returned with warm water and soft towels, Sarah was sitting up slightly, her eyes taking in the simple furnishings of the room, the handmade quilts draped over chairs, the books stacked on rough wooden shelves. "This is a good place," she said, and there was wonder in her voice, as if she hadn't expected to find such peace anywhere in the world. Samuel began to clean her wounds with careful, practiced movements, speaking in low tones about nothing important, just filling the silence with the sound of human kindness. He told her about his cattle, about the way the grass grew thick and green near the creek, about the family of foxes that denned each spring in the hollow beneath the old oak tree. Small things, ordinary things, but Sarah listened as if his words were precious gifts, and perhaps in their own way they were. "I had a daughter, once," he found himself saying, though he'd spoken of Mary to no one in the years since her passing. "She would have been about your age now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than the ones she'd shed in fear and pain. "What was she like?" she asked. Samuel smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as smart," he said. "Always bringing home strays, broken-winged birds, baby rabbits she'd found abandoned in the fields, drove Helen near to distraction with all the creatures she'd nursed back to health." "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Samuel said simply. "They both were my Helen and my Mary, the light of my world, until the fever took them both that terrible winter." The silence that followed was comfortable, somehow filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. Samuel shook his head. Don't be sorry, child. Grief is just love with nowhere to go, and love isn't something to apologize for. Over. The days that followed, Sarah grew stronger in body and spirit, and Samuel found that the house seemed to come alive again with her presence. She helped him tend his small vegetable garden, her hands gentle with the tomato plants and bean vines that Helen had planted so many seasons ago. She learned to milk Bessie, his ancient Holstein cow, and gathered eggs from the hen house each morning, humming softly to herself as she worked. The chickens seemed to recognize her kindness, flocking around her, skirts as if she were some sort of saint of small creatures. Evenings found them sitting by the fire, Samuel reading aloud from books of poetry that had gathered dust on his shelves for years, while Sarah mended tears in his work shirts with stitches, so small and perfect they seemed almost magical. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" he asked one night, watching her fingers dance across the fabric. "My grandmother," Sarah said. "She said a woman who could mend things would never be useless in this world." "Wise woman, your grandmother." "She was." Sarah's voice carried the weight of loss. "She raised me after my parents died, tried to teach me everything she knew about making a home, about being kind even when the world isn't kind back." Samuel looked at her across the flickering firelight. This young woman who'd been left for dead but somehow still believed in goodness, still moved through his house like a blessing. "She did well," he said. "Your grandmother did very well indeed." As weeks passed into months, Samuel began to understand that Sarah had brought more than just her presence to his home. She'd brought hope. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, producing more food than he'd seen in years, and she convinced him to repair the chicken coop's sagging door and fix the loose board on the front porch steps. Small improvements, but they added up to something larger. A sense that life could be more than just surviving, that there was still room for growth and beauty, even in the autumn of his years. Sarah never spoke of what had happened before he found her, and Samuel never pressed her for details, but sometimes late at night he heard her crying softly in Mary's old room, and his heart ached for whatever darkness had brought her to his fence post one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sarah turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what, child?" "For seeing me," she whispered. "For seeing a person worth saving instead of just another burden or another problem to be dealt with." Samuel felt his own eyes grow damp. "Child, you saved me, just as much as I saved you, maybe more." And it was true, he realized in that moment. This broken young woman had given him back his purpose, his reason to wake each morning with something resembling hope. The seasons turned as seasons do, and Sarah's laughter began to fill the spaces between the walls that had known only silence for so long. She planted flowers around the front porch, bright yellow marigolds and purple petunias that nodded in the morning breeze like old friends greeting each other. She baked bread that filled the house with warmth and the kind of comfort that can't be bought or borrowed, only given freely from one heart to another. When winter came, Samuel worried that the cold and darkness might bring back Sarah's nightmares, but instead she threw herself into preparing for the holidays with an enthusiasm that surprised them both. She made cookies shaped like stars and hung evergreen garland around the doorways, and convinced Samuel to bring in a small pine tree that they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper angels cut from old catalog pages. On Christmas morning, she gave him a scarf she'd knitted from wool the color of prairie grass, and he gave her a wooden jewelry box he'd made in his workshop. Sanded smooth as silk and lined with felt the color of her eyes. They were simple gifts, but they carried the weight of something precious, the knowledge that each had found in the other a kind of family neither had dared hope for. "I never thought I'd have another Christmas worth celebrating," Samuel said as they sat by the tree sharing coffee and watching snowfall beyond the windows. "Neither did I," Sarah admitted. "But here we are." Here they were indeed, two souls who'd found each other across the vast loneliness of the world, and discovered that love doesn't always arrive in the ways we expect. Sometimes it comes disguised as rescue, sometimes as simple daily kindness. Spring brought new calves to the pasture, and Sarah delighted in naming each one much as Mary had done so many years before. There was Buttercup with her cream-colored coat, and Daisy, who had a perfect white star on her forehead and a little bull calf. Sarah called Buster, who followed her around like a devoted puppy. Samuel watched her with the animals and marveled at the gentleness that radiated from her like warmth from a well-tended fire. She'd been broken when he found her, but she'd healed herself back together stronger and more beautiful for having survived the breaking. "You know," he said one evening as they watched the sunset,